I've been playing through the original God of War games again lately, and now I'm thinking about puzzles and combat and how combining the two can lead to excellent moments of instruction for the player. There's different ways to teach players about important mechanics. On one end of the spectrum, you can leave it entirely to player discovery. It's a high-risk, high-reward method, leading to exhilarating aha moments as the player finds solutions to problems all on their own, whether through chance, logical deduction, or experimentation. However, it can also lead to a lot of players feeling lost or frustrated for extended periods of time. On the other hand, you have the forced tutorial method, where you're told about specific mechanics, made to perform them before you can move on, and possibly reminded about them later through additional hints and pop-up notifications. The benefit to this is that important mechanics that are necessary for enjoying the game and finding success are presented in a clear way for everyone to understand. The downside is that other players may feel like they're being told too much. Since the games I'm largely known for are Doom, Resident Evil, and God of War, I'm going to be using those as my examples. The original Resident Evil would fall into the first category. Nowhere in the game are you told that you should conserve ammo for later, or try to leave some enemies behind. You learn the hard way by killing too many zombies and then finding yourself in a bad spot. So bad you might need to restart the game, or at least go back to an earlier save. The map doesn't tell you places you haven't finished exploring like it does in the modern Resident Evils. There are no hints towards how you're supposed to be playing, you just learn it through trial and error. In the second category, we'll put Doom Eternal. The new mechanic of weak point targeting is presented in a game-stopping pop-up message on each new enemy that has a weak point. Picking up the chainsaw teleports you to a room that makes you chainsaw 3 enemies before you can move on, and they do it again with the blood punch and the flame belch to make sure you see how to use them, because if you're not using them, you're probably not going to have a good time. Now, I'm not here to necessarily say which of these two extremes is the better option. I believe that it entirely depends on the style of game, the complexity and quantity of important mechanics you're introducing, and the audience you're trying to reach. Playing something like an exploration and puzzle game that doesn't help you along the way can be a rewarding experience, but I'm not always in the mood for that. Sometimes when I'm playing something more action-intense, something faster and more chaotic, I want the game to spell certain things out for me. Sometimes the joy in a game doesn't come from discovery, it comes from mastery and execution. But even then, if a game does explain itself to you, it doesn't mean that there isn't much more to be discovered on your own. Many video games will explain their mechanics in the starting areas with pop-ups. They'll have hints during loading screens, they'll have characters telling you about useful strategies against bosses. Many basic and even intermediate options will often be explained to you, but advanced strategies will be left up to the player to find on their own. And text isn't the only way to do it. Mechanics can be taught through intuitive level design, environmental cues, and emergent gameplay moments. You don't have to literally tell the player, you can shoot barrels to explode nearby enemies. You can allow that to happen naturally through combat scenarios. You can have a scripted animation that shows enemies running into a space as a burning barrel explodes. There's a lot of ways to quote-unquote tutorialize. Bringing this back to God of War, I want to talk about how the old games used to teach their mechanics and how the new ones do. The new God of War games, especially Ragnarok, lean heavily on the pop-up tutorial method. Basic options are explained in the opening hour, attack, dodge, parry, and that's fine. That's how the originals introduced basic controls too, with pop-up notifications like most games. We're tested on these mechanics during the first boss fight with the bear, just like how the original showed us the importance of blocking with the introductory Hydra fight. But there are 2 important mechanics in Ragnarok that I believe were not communicated properly, and that's the Frost Awaken freeze charge of the axe and the Flame Whiplash blade spin. These 2 attacks, performed by holding triangle and mashing triangle, apply elemental effects. They are presented through screen freezing tutorial prompts, showing that the game really wants you to know about them, but then it allows you to pass the next section without even using them once. And I think that's a bit of a failure. Using elemental damage is an important part of enjoying the combat in Ragnarok, and it's unfortunate that they could let something as important as using the new elemental charge attacks slip past you so easily. I think there could have been an on-screen counter that says use this attack 5 times during combat, or else enemies would continue to spawn in. But there's a better way to do this, and it ties into one of my very large criticisms of Ragnarok, and that's the absolute separation of combat and puzzles. In Ragnarok, you are fighting or you are solving a puzzle. You're never doing both, and because of that, the game limits itself in the ways it can teach players. In the original God of War, you are given your first magic attack, Poseidon's Rage, in the first level. The room is flooded with enemies, and using this attack shows you how good it is at clearing a room and stunning everyone around you, as well as driving up the combo counter if you've had an eye on it. It also gives you a moment of invulnerability. It's a great option. For the first hour or 2 hours, depending on how fast you progress, Poseidon's Rage is the only magic attack you have. Once you do battle with Medusa and take her head, you're locked into a room with multiple waves of minotaurs, able to experiment with your new magic attack, Medusa's Gaze. Surely, leaving this room, you'll understand how this new attack works. But there's a phenomenon in people where we tend to revert back to what we know. And I saw this in full display as I was watching someone play through God of War 1 recently. After the Medusa room, they switched back to Poseidon's Rage as they continued the game. They were already familiar with it, and they wouldn't go back to Medusa's Gaze even out of curiosity. Then, 30 minutes later, they entered this room. At the end of the room is a gate, and this gate can only be opened by stepping on a switch at the other end. But if you step off the switch, the gate closes. You can't make it to the other end fast enough. As you battle the Minotaurs, you realize that they keep spawning in. You notice that they too can press the button, and you figure out that if you use Medusa's Gaze to freeze one of them as they step on the button, you'll have just enough time to run through the gate and make it through. It's simple, it's nothing extraordinary, but it's engaging. It gets you to think about how this magic attack is used, by solving a puzzle that involves combat, and it reinforces an important magic option that players may have dismissed out of their comfort with Poseidon's Rage. About an hour later, you're given Zeus's lightning bolt, a long-range projectile. Like the other magic introductions, you're asked to kill enemies with it, 4 soldiers at a distance before you can move on. But again, you could just switch away and forget about it. A few sections later, you come across a man holding a lever that prevents a bridge from being crossed. He's keeping the demons away from him. The only way to pass this part is to shoot him. But the game doesn't tell you. There is no on-screen prompt. There's no Atreus or Freya next to you to say, "Kratos, I bet you could release that lever by using a long-distance projectile."
Shut your mouth! I don't need you!
No, it's up to you to look through your options and remember that you have the lightning, and you'll see if it works here. So the game is introducing important mechanics first by putting them in your hands and letting you experiment with them through introductory combat scenarios, and then it gets you to remember that you have them later by presenting you with puzzle-like scenarios that demand their use. God of War 3 introduces the Hyperion grapple by first telling you about it during grounded combat, which you could simply ignore and then forget about because these are easy enemies anyway. But later you're reminded of the grapple during a fight where you're being bombarded with explosives from the air, which really makes you pay attention to this new move because using it will grab onto the harpies, allowing you to damage them and stay off the ground. So they're introducing a new key mechanic in a way that very clearly demonstrates its benefits. Then you come across pits where the only way to cross them is using the Hyperion grapple to ride harpies across. This happens several times, consistently reminding new players about this attack. And then it all comes together in a big fight where patches of spikes are shooting out of the ground, which you simply move to avoid, but then spikes shoot out of every inch of the ground and there's no room to get away. Suddenly you spot a harpy above you, and you think, hey, that Hyperion grapple move. I can latch onto the harpy with it and stay airborne, and maybe that'll be enough to avoid the spikes. And sure enough, it is. This is the kind of combat mixed with puzzles gameplay that is absent in the new God of War games. It's absent in a lot of games, and it's a shame. So many games just tell you about a mechanic, maybe they make you use it once, or maybe not even that, and then there's nothing in the level design, puzzle design, or combat design that reminds you of their usefulness in smart ways. I think many Ragnarok players would agree that the addition of the Hyperion grapple to the game really adds an important dynamic to combat, and it's just so unfortunate that it's left to being an optional unlockable skill, with no puzzle-like scenarios to demonstrate its usefulness. It's just there as an use it if you want option, when I think it's fundamental to the enjoyment of combat. New God of War has so many puzzles based on throwing the axe or shooting arrows outside of combat scenarios. It's so weird that they never include combat. They easily could have recreated the classic door switch puzzle in Ragnarok by using the Frost Awaken ability. Follow me on this. Close your eyes and imagine this early game puzzle combat scenario. There's a gate that requires you to step on a button and throw your axe to freeze a geyser to open the gate, and you're being attacked by 2 respawning low health enemies. They'll die if you hit them with the axe too many times, so you can't freeze them that way. Your first instinct is to throw the axe into an enemy to freeze them on the button, but then you have to throw it at the geyser, which releases the button because the enemy is unfrozen now and he's walking away. Suddenly you remember the new Frost Awakened freezing axe charge. You gotta use it to freeze one of the enemies while they're standing on the button, and then you throw the axe at the geyser to unlock the gate. And now you've gained experience with this important combat ability through a puzzle scenario. You have remembered to use this ability without the game explicitly telling you about it. The other example I'll explain is the one I briefly mentioned in my Ragnarok review, and it uses the Flame Whiplash, the blade spin that applies fire. Just like the freeze charge, it's introduced with a screen freezing tutorial message that can simply be ignored. So I propose another similar puzzle around opening a gate. Let's say there's a gate that's locked by a frozen mechanism, and you have to find a way to melt it. It can't be ignited, but it will melt after being exposed to a continuous flame. In the room is one respawning enemy with low HP, so it'll die from too many regular hits if you're trying to burn him that way. So what you have to do is use the Flame Whiplash to ignite him immediately, and then find a way to launch him into the air, probably by holding heavy attack, and then combo juggle him in the air to keep his burning body close to the mechanism to melt it. It would take a few tries to get it as a new player, but you would leave this room with great experience of how to use this new spinning blade attack, as well as launching an enemy and using combo juggles. This is the kind of stuff that new God of War needs. Not having anything like this leads to the game having 2 identities that are entirely separated from each other: combat sections and puzzle sections. And while it's fine to have a lot of separation like that, you still need moments where they come together. They make your game a more dynamic experience, and they teach players important skills to finding success and enjoyment in the game. The only thing I learned from Ragnarok puzzles was how to throw my axe at things, which is a part of combat, but it's hardly a foundational piece of the combat design. Nowhere near as important as the new elemental attacks, managing runic attack cooldowns, dodging and parrying. Why are there no puzzles that ask you to parry something? Parrying in God of War is pretty forgiving. Anyone can do it if given multiple chances in a controlled environment. An occasional projectile parry puzzle would be a great way to get people into the mechanic who aren't comfortable with it yet. Again, the old games understood this. The introduction of the Golden Fleece in God of War 2 puts you into a situation where you have to stand at the right angle and time a parry to break open a wall, showing the power of this new ability. And then right after it, you meet some Medusas, and your curious mind will say, hey, can this thing parry their gaze too? And it turns out it can, instantly turning Medusas to stone with their own power, giving you a new powerful combat option that you'll never forget. Man, I just miss this kind of game design. I do still believe that Ragnarok does a better job at getting you into its combat mechanics than 2018, with the elemental protection health bars on some enemies, the skill tree buff for weapon switching elemental damage, things like that. But I feel there should have been more emphasis on these really important options like Flame Whiplash, Frost Awaken, and Hyperion Grapple through some smart classic puzzle design, and that could have given us better puzzle variety too. There are good puzzles in God of War Ragnarok, way better than the ones in 2018, but they feel like you're playing a different game. It feels like the studio set up 2 different groups, one for combat scenarios and one for puzzle sections, and they just never spoke, with no game director trying to see how they could benefit each other. And puzzles that have combat don't just teach you important combat mechanics, which makes combat more fun overall, but it makes the puzzles better too. There's so much more you can do if you aren't limited to making puzzles in empty rooms where the solutions have nothing to do with how you play the rest of the game. They finally start bringing in the combat challenges in the Muspelheim realm, but at this point it's too late. This stuff is important to introduce in the opening hours of your game, not 40 hours in. Sometimes people ask why I prefer God of War over the other hack and slash titles like Bayonetta and Devil May Cry, and the puzzle combat design is part of it. I like Bayonetta, I like Devil May Cry, but apart from me just having a major preference for the world, story, art, violence, music, and characters of God of War, the puzzle combat aspect has always been a big deal to me when talking about these games. I think it's really smart. I think it's a great way to communicate mechanics to new players and get more people into the fun zone. I'm not saying it's perfect, far from it. There's more that the old games could have done in terms of balance and making more aspects of combat important. But the puzzle aspect, actually requiring the use of key mechanics and strategies the developers want you to use, is a step in the right direction and deserves to be expanded upon, not abandoned for puzzles that don't contribute to the player's understanding of their character's abilities in combat spaces. It's why I will always defend the platforming sections in Doom Eternal, because to the untrained eye, they're just pace breakers, annoyances to players that just want to get back into the action. And sure, some of the platforming sections exist solely to break up the combat and add to the navigation of large ambitious levels, but one must ask themselves, what are some of these early game platforming puzzles asking me to do in order to pass them? Spacing out double jumps and dashes instead of mashing them impatiently. Jumping from one location to another quickly while precisely controlling where you land under pressure of death. Shooting a target while getting airborne from a jump pad. Performing 180-degree spins in the air followed by air dashing. These aren't just platform puzzle skills, they are puzzles specifically designed to teach new players how to move in arena combat. They absolutely helped many people survive once the combat started ramping up. They started controlling their dashes, hitting targets in the air, moving more intelligently and confidently, because they had already been made to do all of it to pass the platforming sections. And it's a testament to just how well designed those platforming puzzles are, because to this day, hardly anyone even recognizes how well they taught people how to move in combat. They learned combat and movement skills by passing seemingly tedious tasks and didn't even realize it. It's very Karate Kid, if you know what I mean. Except jumping around a level is more fun than washing a car. Thanks a lot for watching this video. You can tell this is a topic I care a lot about, communication of a game's core systems. Ragnarok really got me thinking a lot about it, and I want to see more games involve puzzles that teach you how to play in interesting ways. Check out my Ragnarok review if you haven't already. Check out the other installments in the Challenge Matters series. If you want more puzzle discussion, I have a video on how to fix the bad puzzles in Resident Evil Village, and I'll see you next time.